Indian textiles in European markets. By the early 18th century, worried by the popularity of Indian textiles, wool and silk makers in England began protesting against the import of the Indian cotton textiles. In 1720, the British government enacted a legislation banning the use of printed cotton textiles, chintz, in England. Interestingly, this act was known as the Calico Act. At this time, textile industries had just begun to develop in England. Unable to compete with the Indian textiles, English producers wanted a secure market within the country by preventing the entry of Indian textiles. The first to grow under government protection was the calico printing industry. Indian designs were now imitated and printed in England on white muslin or plain unbleached Indian cloth. Competition with Indian textiles also led to a search for technological innovation in England. In 1764, the spinning jenny was invented by John Kay, which increased the productivity of the traditional spindles. The invention of the steam engine by Richard Arkwright in 1786 revolutionized cotton textile weaving. Cloth could now be woven in immense quantities and cheaply too. However, Indian textiles continued to dominate the world trade till the end of the 18th century. European trading companies, the Dutch, the French, and the English made enormous profits out of this flourishing trade. These companies purchased cotton and silk textiles in India by importing silver. But as you know, when the English East India Company gained political power in Bengal, it no longer had to import precious metals to buy the Indian goods. Instead, they collected revenues from peasants and zamindars in India and used this revenue to buy the Indian textiles. The development of cotton industries in Britain affected the textile producers in India in several ways. First, Indian textiles now had to compete with the British textiles in the European and American markets. Second, exporting textiles to England also became increasingly difficult since very high duties were imposed on the Indian textiles imported into Britain. By the beginning of the 19th century, the English-made cotton textiles successfully ousted the Indian goods from their traditional markets in Africa, America, and Europe. Thousands of weavers in India were now thrown out of employment. The Bengal weavers were the worst hit. English and European companies stopped buying Indian goods, and their agents no longer gave out advances to weavers to secure supplies. But the worst was still to come. By the 1830s, the British cotton cloth flooded the Indian markets. In fact, by the 1880s, two-thirds of all the cotton clothes worn by the Indians were made of cloth produced in Britain. This affected not only specialist weavers, but also spinners. Thousands of rural women who made a living by spinning cotton thread were rendered jobless. Later, during the national movement, Mahatma Gandhi urged the people to boycott imported textiles and use hand-spun and hand-woven cloth. Khadi gradually became a symbol of nationalism. The charkha came to represent India, and it was put at the center of the tricolour flag of the Indian National Congress, adopted in 1931. Many weavers became agricultural labourers. Some migrated to cities in search of work, and yet others went out of the country to work in plantations in Africa and South America. Some of these handloom weavers also found work in the new cotton mills that were established in Bombay, now Mumbai, Ahmedabad, Sholapur, Nagpur, and Kanpur.